Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 76, Misfortune Leads to Fortune. The driver stiffened, holding his gun awkwardly for 3 seconds. His gaze moved from the seemingly harmless boy in front of him, who was almost entirely soaked in blood, to the gun in his own hand. Mother of... Why didn't he put the safety on before sticking it in his pocket? What if it accidentally discharges? The driver felt horrified, realizing that he was probably dealing with someone whose head wasn't quite right. A normal person wouldn't put a gun like that by their side without engaging the safety. And all that blood on him. What had this guy just done? Killed someone and dismembered them? Even if he stood a bit farther away, it wouldn't make sense for him to end up covered in that much blood. Plus, this guy had such a strange attitude towards being kidnapped. Knowing there was a warehouse full of bombs here, his first reaction was to burst out laughing. Definitely a psychopath. Absolutely a psychopath. Yokohama used to be really dangerous, but lately things had improved quite a bit, right? That was why the driver dared to come back. And yet he'd ended up with someone like this, a psycho who didn't even engage the gun's safety. Why was his life so miserable? Still, he wasn't ready to give up just yet. After all, everyone had dreams. What if he managed to pull this off? The driver forced a nervous smile and slowly lowered the gun. Ha, it's a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding. We can talk this out. He discreetly moved his fingers, trying to disengage the gun's safety. Damn, he shouldn't have underestimated the guy in the first place, thinking he could just scare him, so he hadn't activated the safety. But it wasn't too late now. If he succeeded, at least he could reclaim half the victory. Even though he'd learned his lesson, the sight of a teenager still made the driver subconsciously underestimate him. Bang! A bullet whizzed past his ear, and the driver froze in place. Shit! He actually fired. That's too decisive. Drop the gun on the ground and put your hands up. Since I still need you to drive, I wasn't aiming at you. But if there's a next time, I'll have no choice but to aim at you, okay? The silver-haired demon smiled brightly, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. He asked in a gentle, polite tone. If possible, I really don't want to do anything else. I just need you to do me a favor. Would you be able to help me? Driver. Your way of asking for a favor is really very sincere, so sincere that it's hard for anyone to refuse. The driver obediently threw down the gun, with no resistance left in him. It seemed like this guy didn't plan on killing him to tie up loose ends, so it was better to just go along with it. Annoying a psycho was never safe. If he could make it home in one piece, he would leave Yokohama tonight and never come back, no matter who said Yokohama was a good place to make easy money. In the end, the entire time, the driver was forced at gunpoint by Komaeda Nagito to load the bombs into the trunk. He had left it empty for the kidnapping, usually keeping a rope or something in there, but this time it conveniently held all of Komaeda Nagito's bombs. Then he also stuffed the back seat full of bomb crates before finally sitting down in the front row with Komaeda Nagito. Is this alright, young master? The driver sighed, adding a slightly mocking tone to his polite words. What do you even need all these bombs for? Isn't this enough? I'm telling you, these bombs aren't cheap. Komaeda Nagito, sitting in the passenger seat, held the gun on the driver with one hand while checking his phone with the other. I'm not sure if it's enough, but I can't carry any more. Ah. His phone rang, showing the caller ID Edgar Allan Poe. He immediately answered. Poe-kun. We think it's somewhere around a Western-style mansion in the West. I'll send the coordinates to your email in a moment, but the intel is from yesterday, so we can't be sure whether they moved after the failed attack yesterday. Thanks, Poe-kun, that's enough. Edgar Allan Poe, knowing that Komaeda Nagito was on good terms with Dazai Osamu, assumed that Komaeda Nagito was helping out the port mafia, so he didn't question it much. He laughed and said, Does this mean we beat Ranpo? Ha, well, Komaeda Nagito laughed and brushed Edgar Allan Poe off. What could he do? When he tricked Edgar Allan Poe into helping him, he used his words to make Edgar Allan Poe think that Edogawa Ranpo hadn't figured it out. That was the only reason Edgar Allan Poe got interested in the first place. In fact, Edogawa Ranpo hadn't even started investigating, and Komaeda Nagito still didn't know which side was stronger, so he couldn't give a definitive answer. Edgar Allan Poe, seemingly not used to interacting with people, was clearly so strong in detective skills yet fell for such simple tricks. He didn't notice anything strange even after hanging up the call. After ending the call, Komaeda Nagito checked his email and gave the address to the driver. "Take me here." "Alright, make sure you sit tight." The driver said expressionlessly as he started the car, pushing it to the speed limit allowed by traffic laws, wanting to quickly drop off this demon and escape. If he weren't carrying someone's life on his back, he would have already handed this lunatic over to the police right now. As they drove, it started to rain outside. Yesterday it had rained a bit too, but it stopped quickly. Today, though, the rain kept coming down harder. The driver turned on the wipers, feeling the silence grow awkward, so he tried to make small talk. "What are you doing over there?" "Taking bombs with you. It's raining now. Should we call it off?" Komaeda Nagito looked at the raindrops beating on the windshield and thought for a moment. "No, keep going. Maybe by the time we get there, the rain will stop." The driver looked at the pouring rain outside and didn't dare answer carelessly. But what else could he do now? His life was still in this guy's hands. At this distance, he could try grabbing the gun, but since the maniac didn't put the safety on even when it was in his pocket, he certainly wouldn't now while pointing it at him. Who knew if it might discharge when he grabbed it? Plus, considering his current speed, with the heavy rain and slippery road, if he got distracted, it could end in an accident involving both of them. It might be better to slow down. If he was going to do anything, it should be after they arrived. If this maniac changed his mind, the driver could get away safely. There was no need for dangerous maneuvers now. Regardless of the driver's thoughts, Komaeda Nagito safely arrived at the destination. The strangest thing was, as soon as Komaeda Nagito opened the car door, the rain stopped. The driver looked back, amazed. "Are you a child of destiny or what? Huh? You said it would stop raining, and it did. You've been wanting these bombs all along, and I'm the unlucky one to run into you, giving them to you for free, right?" His words were half out of frustration and half flattery, hoping Komaeda Nagito would be in a good mood and keep his word to let him go. Komaeda Nagito never planned to do anything to him, so after the driver unloaded the bombs, he indicated the driver could leave. The driver wasn't selling goods, he wasn't about to ask if Komaeda Nagito needed help moving the bombs to the destination or ask for a 5-star review for his service. He immediately left once he finished, terrified that the next moment, the guy might change his mind and decide it was better to eliminate witnesses. Komaeda Nagito, left behind, walked a couple of steps to the foot of a mountain. It wasn't suitable for driving, with thick trees and water dripping down after the recent rain. The scenery here wasn't bad. If you walked around to the other side of the mountain, you'd find a proper road for driving and stone steps for walking. Halfway up the mountain stood a Western-style mansion. It was said to have belonged to a foreign noble before the war, but after the war, the owner left, and no new owner had ever been found, leaving it abandoned. According to Edgar Allan Poe, Mimic's headquarters was likely in that Western-style mansion. Komaeda Nagito organized his stuff under the roots of a tree at the foot of the mountain. First, there were the bomb crates. Some were quite large, including remote-controlled ones and timed ones, all waterproof. They surely weren't cheap, but they also weren't that expensive. Otherwise, someone like the driver wouldn't have been able to afford so many. He hadn't tested their performance yet, so Komaeda Nagito wasn't entirely sure about their quality. After that was a backpack that could be packed. It was also something he borrowed from the driver. There were quite a few tools in that warehouse, but not many that Komaeda Nagito could actually use. Inside the backpack, he had put a binocular, and there was still plenty of space left. Komaeda Nagito stuffed those smaller bombs into the backpack, enough that it wouldn't be too heavy for him to carry. As for the rest of the bomb crates, Komaeda Nagito spread those crates out, placing them, and then chose a spot far from where the bomb was set to climb the mountain. Even though climbing the stone steps would certainly be convenient, Komaeda Nagito, of course, wasn't foolish enough to use them. Wouldn't that be directly exposing himself to the enemy's sight? He could only take the rough and inconvenient path, where there was no proper road. Fortunately, the lower part of the slope wasn't too steep, so although it was troublesome, it wasn't particularly dangerous. Komaeda Nagito hung the binocular around his neck and frequently took it up to look into the distance. Maybe it had just stopped raining, but the sky was still dim, and visibility wasn't great, so Komaeda Nagito hadn't discovered anything along the way. However, similarly, the enemy probably hadn't discovered Komaeda Nagito either. Theoretically speaking, while defending a position, scouts should be deployed to check the surroundings. But there were only about 20 Mimic members left, and with the heavy rain just now reducing visibility, the defensive perimeter would naturally shrink accordingly. Given that mountainous terrain is highly suitable for individual combat, they probably didn't have the intention to conduct guerrilla attacks. Their combat power was likely focused near the mansion, for coordinated response. Hopefully Pokuan guessed correctly, and Mimic hasn't moved their base. After climbing for a while, Komaeda Nagito had to rest for a bit. Fortunately, Yosano Akiko had already healed him, otherwise being up in the mountains would be truly troublesome. Moreover, every now and then along the way, he'd drop a bomb, lightening his backpack, which helped him continue climbing. At present, while resting, Komaeda Nagito casually took out the binocular to take a look, suddenly noticing a glint not far away. In this kind of weather, for him to catch even a glint, Komaeda Nagito's luck was indeed something else. Getting closer to the source of the glint, it was hard to say for sure. Perhaps it was a member of Mimic, maybe a crow carrying a shiny object back to its nest, or maybe something else entirely. Komaeda Nagito wasn't trained and couldn't determine the truth just based on this level of information. However, looking toward the mountain peak, Komaeda Nagito felt that he was probably getting close to the point where the western mansion and he would be on a parallel level. It was possible he would encounter Mimic members soon or perhaps run into some traps. Let's give it a try. Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment, then pulled his backpack over and rummaged through it, finding a remote control. He double-checked the numbers, then pressed down. The next moment, an explosion boomed at the foot of the mountain, even causing the middle of the mountain where Komaeda Nagito stood to shake. The effect was so impressive that it surprised Komaeda Nagito himself. In the midst of this shaking, water droplets from the treetops splattered down, soaking the leaves, and drenched Komaeda Nagito, who had managed to stay dry during the heavy rain. Ignoring his now wet hair, Komaeda Nagito grabbed the binocular to take another look in the direction that had initially seemed suspicious. This time, he saw clearly. There was obvious movement. After comparing it to his previous observation, Komaeda Nagito realized that the figure had moved in his direction, but after the explosion, they no longer moved slowly. Instead, they were quickly changing course, heading toward the source of the explosion. Oh wow, that was close, Komaeda Nagito sighed. If I hadn't detonated it just in time, I would have probably run into them soon. My luck really is good. But I need to hurry. Komaeda Nagito knew very well that compared to those soldiers, his camouflage skills were basically useless, so he hadn't bothered concealing his tracks. When those people arrived at the foot of the mountain, they'd naturally be able to discover his traces and pursue him. Time wasn't on his side. However, diverting their attention could at least buy him some time. So Komaeda Nagito detonated a few more bombs in other directions, hoping to create more confusion for Mimic. After promptly discarding the now useless remote control, Komaeda Nagito found his load even lighter. He didn't rest further, getting up and moving forward with renewed determination. Actually, this time, as he continued, Komaeda Nagito realized that maybe he had detonated too many bombs in one go earlier, causing the mountain to shake too violently. This even triggered some traps to become exposed. It seemed getting kidnapped this time wasn't completely without benefit. By the time Komaeda Nagito finally reached his intended destination, it had started raining again, quickly turning into a downpour. He was now behind the western mansion, and since he was high enough, he could observe the situation near the mansion. The place wasn't built as a military base after all, so the cover was superficial at best. As long as one occupied a high point, one could see everything. The garden of the mansion, originally intended for flowers, had now been abandoned and appeared quite empty. Komaeda Nagito could even see mimic guards stationed there. Komaeda Nagito was deep in thought. Mimic. They must be planning a final showdown with Oda-san, right? This setup, despite the limited personnel, clearly wasn't for a large-scale battle. In that case, it would be best to concentrate the enemy's forces. Thus, Komaeda Nagito began to detonate the bombs he had laid along his way, and the last explosion occurred just at the horizontal line of the mansion and the mountainside. This should be enough to make Mimic realize that the enemy had arrived, prompting those at the foot of the mountain to rush back. The rain kept falling harder, as if that brief pause had only existed to facilitate Komaeda Nagito's climb up the mountain. Komaeda Nagito's appearance now was admittedly a bit miserable, completely drenched, but even if he had an umbrella, he couldn't possibly use it now, as that would instantly reveal his position. Holding the binocular, Komaeda Nagito watched for a while, mumbling to himself. Alright, next is... Bang! A bullet struck the tree next to Komaeda Nagito. Just a moment ago, Komaeda Nagito had used this same tactic to intimidate his kidnapper. Now it was his turn. At this distance, it was undoubtedly a sniper rifle. But it was still quite far, and with the rain, even a highly skilled sniper wouldn't be able to guarantee a kill with a single shot. Komaeda Nagito ducked behind the tree, knowing that he had likely been exposed. The higher he climbed, the fewer trees there were to provide cover, while the number of rocks increased. Naturally, the risk increased compared to before. However, being exposed only now was actually pretty good. Komaeda Nagito had originally assumed Mimic would have discovered him sooner, given their military discipline. Bang! Another shot rang out, and Komaeda Nagito could hear the cracking of the tree beside him. Really, even if they discovered me just 5 minutes later, that would have been fine. Komaeda Nagito cautiously set his backpack down, taking out a remote control and keeping it on him. Then he used his eyes to gauge the distance to his original target. It was a large rock. When Komaeda Nagito had viewed the mountain with the binocular from below, he had noticed that the rock didn't quite seem right. It looked like it could easily trigger a landslide. Back then, Komaeda Nagito had felt it was a sign of good fortune. He had been given bombs and even discovered a precariously placed rock. How could this not be interpreted as assistance in executing his plan? Others might think that since the rock had been there for years without any issues, it would remain safe. However, Komaeda Nagito, having experienced many accidents, had an almost inexplicable sense for danger. Sometimes, he simply knew at a glance, something was going to happen here. Because the area below the rock wasn't suitable for observation, Komaeda Nagito could only take cover on the side. It felt like he was close enough now, though approaching was risky, as the sniper below seemed to have adjusted for wind and rain, with bullets increasingly close to hitting him. Let's give it a try. After gauging the distance between himself and the rock, Komaeda Nagito felt it was close enough. He decided to leave the rest to luck. With all his strength, he threw his backpack towards the rock. Komaeda Nagito hoped it would stop right behind the rock, securing it. If it landed elsewhere, given the slope of the nearby ground, it could easily slide down. Komaeda Nagito, with his usual good fortune, had his luck run out at the critical moment. His backpack struck a rock on the mountain. It didn't explode but was flung away, its trajectory heading towards the edge. Komaeda Nagito could only watch as the backpack fell to the ground, then rolled down due to inertia. Ah! How unfortunate! Was I pushing it too much? Komaeda Nagito sighed. It was only Komaeda Nagito who could feel regret over the failure of such a chaotic plan. An ordinary person wouldn't have thought this plan could succeed from the start. But after this misfortune, shouldn't it be time for some good luck? Maybe I could make it home before dinner. Huh? Suddenly sensing that something wasn't right, Komaeda Nagito widened his eyes, too distracted even to hide, and peeked his head out to look. It could be that he had set off too many explosions today, or maybe the heavy rain had loosened the soil. When his backpack fell, it knocked into some small rocks, and those rocks began rolling down together with the backpack. A few seconds later, he covered his eyes and burst into laughter. What is this? I'm actually still lucky. Though the process was a bit different, the outcome isn't that far from what I imagined. Ha 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 ha. The heavy rain drowned out his maniacal laughter. Inside the mansion, people were undisturbed by the storm outside. The soundproofing was excellent. The phone had just barely started ringing when it was answered. Hello, this is the Armed Detective Agency. What? You're looking for Ranpo-san? Well, Ranpo-san doesn't usually take calls. Could I ask what this is regarding? You can tell me first. The employee of the Armed Detective Agency who answered the phone was a bit confused by the caller's request. The caller was Edgar Allan Poe. After giving Komaeda Nagito the location, he felt as if he'd defeated Edogawa Ranpo, and was so happy he wanted to boast a little. But calling a stranger was a bit awkward for Edgar Allan Poe. He had spent some time preparing himself mentally, listing out all the possible situations he might encounter, and only after calming down a bit did he dial the number for the Armed Detective Agency. The employee listened to Edgar Allan Poe patiently, looking increasingly surprised. Huh? You're saying you defeated Ranpo-san? Edogawa Ranpo, who was leisurely snacking nearby, immediately jumped up upon hearing this. Slander. Ranpo-sama has never lost. Who's spreading such unbelievable lies? Edogawa Ranpo ran over and grabbed the phone. Who are you? Recognizing Edogawa Ranpo's voice, Allan Poe immediately tensed up again. We may have lost to you before. But this time we won. We found the Mimic headquarters. Huh? Edogawa Ranpo blinked. Mimic headquarters? Why do you think that means you've won against Ranpo-sama? Wait a minute, are you the one who took the request I just turned down? Edgar Allan Poe realized the situation wasn't quite what he'd thought, and was stunned for a moment. All the earlier points of doubt finally connected for him at this moment. Come to think of it, Komaeda-kun never said that Ranpo couldn't complete the request, only that Ranpo didn't give him an answer. Not taking the request completely matched what Komaeda-kun had said. Komaeda-kun, why? Edgar Allan Poe was so embarrassed he almost lost consciousness, and in his panic, he hung up the phone. Thankfully, he hadn't given his name. There might still be hope. Edogawa Ranpo frowned slightly as he listened to the hurried hang-up, then ran straight to the president's office. President. What is it? Fukuzawa Yukichi organized the documents in front of him to prevent Edogawa Ranpo from crushing them. Edogawa Ranpo immediately dropped a bombshell. President, your junior disciple went to look for Mimic. The documents fell from Fukuzawa Yukichi's hands. What kind of joke is this? Natsume-sensei said his junior disciple didn't have any special abilities. He hurriedly stood up. Call Yosano, we need a car. Where is Mimic headquarters? Finding the map would take too long, so Edogawa Ranpo ran to the window and pulled back the curtain, pointing towards the distant mountain. President, look over there, that's Mimic headquarters. Suddenly, Edogawa Ranpo fell silent. Fukuzawa Yukichi came over, incredulous, and opened the window. Outside, amidst the torrential rain, he stuck his head out to stare at that mountain, as if a mere few centimeters difference could confirm whether what he saw was an illusion. A landslide. Chapter 76 End. Chapter 77, Survivors and Gunshot. Fukuzawa Yukichi quickly regained his composure, took out his phone, and dialed the number Natsume-sensei had given him earlier today. For so many years, Natsume-sensei had always been mysterious, and even Ranpo couldn't find a trace of him. Yet now, it was through the junior disciple that he managed to get in touch with him. He should have thought about it sooner. The fact that Natsume-sensei had acted unusually to facilitate this connection meant that this junior disciple was definitely no ordinary person. Why hadn't he realized it sooner? He had merely thought the junior disciple had an eccentric personality and therefore needed extra attention. Natsume-sensei had mentioned that the junior disciple had a rather miraculous kind of luck, but he hadn't thought much of it. No, even if he had considered it, he couldn't have imagined that the junior disciple would end up encountering a landslide shortly after leaving him. Human imagination has its limits, after all. Fukuzawa Yukichi was actually quite skilled in maintaining his calm, and he'd always believed that he wouldn't flinch even if Mount Tai collapsed before him. But now, staring at the landslide outside the window, and it wasn't even Mount Tai, he felt a sense of suffocation. Natsume Soseki answered the phone quickly, perhaps sensing that any call from Fukuzawa Yukichi had to be for an urgent matter. Fukuzawa Yukichi took a deep breath. Natsume-sensei, I have failed your expectations. Ranpo said the junior disciple went to find Mimic. Natsume Soseki, and then? He didn't ask how Komaeda Nagito found out where Mimic's headquarters was. Natsume Soseki knew that with his instructions, Fukuzawa Yukichi wouldn't let Edogawa Ranpo take on Komaeda Nagito's request. That would be reckless, after all. But considering Komaeda Nagito's luck, who knew if he might overhear someone discussing the location of Mimic's headquarters just by taking a few steps? This was an exaggerated example, but Natsume Soseki had spent a year mentoring Komaeda Nagito, and during that year, numerous miraculous incidents had occurred. It made him take these improbable possibilities seriously, rather than outright dismissing them as absolutely impossible. Fukuzawa Yukichi spoke with a heavy tone, the place where Mimic's headquarters is located, there's a landslide happening there now. Natsume Soseki. Even for Natsume Soseki, the idea that this landslide might be connected to Komaeda Nagito was startling. Granted, there had already been incidents involving meteors hitting the parents of Komaeda, who seemed to be a disaster magnet, but Komaeda Nagito was now in his teens, and in all that time, only that one meteor had fallen. Later incidents involving boats and planes were relatively trivial compared to the meteor. Moreover, the kind of shocking accidents that befell him weren't exactly frequent. More often than not, it was everyday mishaps, tripping over, freak accidents during business transactions, getting kidnapped, that led people to misunderstand just how dangerous Komaeda Nagito really was. But now, well, Natsume Soseki was finally wide awake. With this landslide incident, no matter how people felt that Komaeda Nagito didn't possess any special ability to cause a landslide, as long as he was on that mountain, there was no way to dissociate him from it. Given his history, no one could, in good conscience, claim that Komaeda Nagito had nothing to do with it. But that wasn't the main point right now. Natsume Soseki said nervously, Komaeda might be caught in the landslide. I'm bringing Yosano. Fukuzawa Yukichi made this call primarily to inform Natsume Soseki in advance. After all, the first day Natsume-sensei handed over the junior disciple to him, something like this had already happened. It wouldn't do not to report it. Time is critical. I'll contact you again once I've found Komaeda-kun. At the same time, Komaeda Nagito stood at the top of the mountain, looking at the scene below, which could indeed be called a disaster, finally coming to a halt. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. This had been quick. If the landslide had been a bit more severe, it could have gone on for hours. The rain had stopped several minutes earlier. It had been a heavy rain, and yet it stopped so abruptly, as if it had good timing. Now descending the mountain was much less dangerous. If it had continued raining heavily, there could have been a second wave of landslides. Komaeda Nagito waited a few more minutes, using binoculars to observe the original location of the Western-style mansion for a while. Seeing no one crawling out, he decided to descend the mountain. Of course, he wouldn't choose this side to descend, he'd pick a safer route. Just as Komaeda Nagito was about to lower the binoculars, he suddenly paused and shifted their focus slightly. When he had driven to the mountain, the scenery along the way had naturally caught his eye, and the closer he got to this side of the mountain, the fewer people and vehicles there were, but there were still a few, sporadically, maybe 2 or 3 vehicles passing by per minute. Otherwise, the moment any vehicle approached, Mimic on the mountain would immediately be alerted. But now, there were more than a dozen vehicles approaching at once, and one had already stopped at the foot of the mountain as he watched. Although there had been a landslide, this was private property, and since the owner wasn't there, there shouldn't theoretically be anyone else around. The alert level shouldn't be as high as in residential areas during a landslide. Especially given the efficiency of the Yokohama police, they shouldn't have arrived so quickly, and these vehicles didn't even look like police cars. Komaeda Nagito made a guess, they were probably from the port mafia. Dazai Osamu had likely found Mimic's headquarters, but it could also be someone else, considering the magnitude of the landslide here. Yokohama always had its share of strange forces, it was impossible to determine for sure. Unfortunately, his phone was dead. But the signal up in the mountains wasn't great anyway, and with the weather like this, even if he had power, he probably wouldn't be able to get through. So, it didn't matter who was approaching. It wouldn't have much of an effect on him. Whether friend or foe, he would welcome them. At this moment, waiting in place for the rescue team would probably be the best course of action. But Komaeda Nagito wasn't one to choose the conventional route. He didn't particularly want anyone to know that the landslide had anything to do with him. Dostoevsky had apparently been tailing him, and he wasn't sure about the progress of Natsume-sensei's plan. It was better to stay low-key and not attract attention, avoiding unnecessary trouble for the sensei. Thus, Komaeda Nagito chose a direction and began heading down the mountain, intending to leave before the area was cordoned off. But the truth was, this mountain had always been difficult to traverse, and after a heavy rain, every step sank into slippery mud. Even leaning against a tree didn't feel safe. As he continued on, Komaeda Nagito instinctively moved towards a man-made stone stairway. Although it was relatively close to the landslide zone, the stone stairway was actually safer at the moment. As long as all the Mimic members were dead, being a bit closer didn't really matter. Komaeda Nagito was confident he wouldn't encounter another landslide. After struggling his way to the stone stairway, Komaeda Nagito found his footing much more secure, and his steps became lighter. However, just as he was making his way comfortably along the stone stairway, someone suddenly grabbed him from behind, lifted him by the neck, and left him barely standing on tiptoe, struggling to breathe. Who? Komaeda Nagito grabbed the person's arm with both hands, but his opponent was immensely strong, lifting him effortlessly like a chick. The arm was as hard as iron, with no sign of weakening. Even without an answer, Komaeda Nagito could guess that this was probably one of the Mimic survivors. Landslides, mudslides, and avalanches all have similar survival strategies. Run to either side of where the disaster is occurring. Running straight won't let you outrun these natural calamities. Luckily, they all have their limits, escaping beyond that range would ensure safety. He wasn't sure how many people had managed to escape. At this point, the person behind Komaeda Nagito spoke in heavily accented Japanese. "What have you done?" Komaeda Nagito, still in the mood for idle thoughts, couldn't help but wonder why all these foreigners were learning Japanese. The grip around his throat loosened slightly, allowing Komaeda Nagito to speak clearly. "Who are you? You climbed this mountain, and you still don't know who we are?" Undoubtedly, Komaeda Nagito drew a lower breath. This survivor was none other than Mimic's leader, Andre Guy. Andre Guy had led Mimic across various countries, hoping to provide those soldiers whose honor had been tarnished by political deals a place to return, even when their homeland denied them. And for those warriors, returning meant the battlefield. Up until now, Mimic has been acting for the wish of dying on the battlefield, showing no fear of death, nor of anything else. Additionally, Andre Guy, with his charisma as a leader and his ability to foresee, effectively commanded them, making their operational capability and fighting power far surpass that of ordinary armies. After arriving in Japan, the hardest part was Andre Guy's impending death. Upon discovering Oda Sakanosuke's existence, he found hope, intending to entrust his own aspirations onto Oda Sakanosuke. With Andre Guy suddenly invigorated as a commander, the morale of the Mimic soldiers changed too. Each of them firmly believed that Japan would be where they met their honorable deaths. With such a collective mindset, their spirits were undeniably different. However, this unit of soldiers, who believed they could finally fulfill their wish, ended up not truly dying on the battlefield, but instead lost their lives due to a sudden landslide. At the time of the landslide, Andre Guy wasn't at the mansion. Almost immediately upon sensing the movement above, he reacted and managed to buy some time to escape, but ultimately he could only ensure his own survival and lacked the strength to save any of his subordinates. Even as the landslide ended, Andre Guy felt disoriented. Why did something like this have to happen? So absurd. After finally finding a burial place, the result was dying in this incomprehensible accident. How frustrating. When he came back to his senses, Andre Guy realized that this wasn't any ordinary accident. The explosion today had been too frequent to ignore. No matter how shaken someone might be, there was no way they could simply forget about this. It was clear, someone had ambushed Mimic. Moreover, before the landslide, he'd even received a report that someone was watching them from above. It couldn't be Oda Sakanosuke. He had crossed swords with Oda Sakanosuke before, and his style wasn't like this at all. Then who could it be? Was this landslide an accident or the result of someone's ability? It wasn't surprising that Andre Guy could think of it as a supernatural ability affecting them before knowing of Komaeda Nagito's grand background. After all, it was simply because his logic was far beyond ordinary that he thought of it that way. When an explosion occurred at the foot of the mountain, some Mimic members immediately went down to investigate. They discovered traces and pursued them all the way, only to find a single person. Andre Guy, considering normal reasoning, couldn't believe that an ordinary person could single-handedly carry a bomb all the way to the Mimic headquarters on a mountain and blow it up without incident. Clearly, this person had special powers and was someone daring enough to take them on alone. As for the special powers, naturally, that meant an ability. Abilities users had always looked down on ordinary people, and Andre Guy couldn't help but look at his own subordinates differently because of it. While Andre Guy pondered the ability of this individual and even dared to seek him out, the landslide struck. Goodness gracious, he barely had time to escape, let alone figure out the enemy's ability. Andre Guy's foresight power had saved him from death's grip many times, yet even now, it couldn't help him in this situation. The foresight was time-limited, and facing such a large-scale natural disaster, what good were a few seconds' notice? In this state, he almost didn't make it out and was nearly swept away. If he died in this kind of landslide, Andre Guy would be too unwilling. The phrase, unfulfilled death, wouldn't even begin to describe it. Though he successfully escaped thanks to being in a relatively favorable position, most of his subordinates weren't so lucky. Because of this, Andre Guy felt no joy in his survival. Instead, he was engulfed in fury. Who on earth would dare humiliate them like this, to make soldiers who were supposed to die on the battlefield perish so easily, so meaninglessly? It was unfortunate, even though he knew that person had to be right by the mansion. When his subordinate took aim, he even got a look at him, and roughly deduced his location, but during the landslide, despite his strong desire to avenge his subordinates, Andre Guy couldn't act recklessly. When the landslide stopped, he immediately started heading upwards. He had no choice. He thought the enemy must be waiting there, ensuring it was truly safe before descending. At the very least, he would have half an hour, enough time for him to make his way up. He also felt it would definitely be safer up above than below. If another landslide came, the chances of survival would be better if he headed upwards rather than staying in one place, so he went. Nevertheless, Andre Guy was careful and figured the person above definitely had binoculars, which provided a bird's-eye view of what was happening below. Hence, he refused to take the stone steps and chose the more arduous muddy path. As such, after walking for some time, he heard someone stepping onto the stone steps, heading down. Andre Guy. Is this person out of his mind? Going down now? Not afraid of another landslide? This discovery made Andre Guy even more certain of his hypothesis. The landslide had indeed been under the enemy's control. Otherwise, there was no way to explain this person's carefree behavior without the slightest concern. His rage flared up again, and he turned to hide among the trees. A moment later, Komaeda Nagito came into Andre Gia's sight. Komaeda Nagito looked disheveled, drenched all over, with his pants covered in mud. His shoes' color was indistinguishable. His coat had been taken off and placed over his head to shield against the rain. Now, he put it back on but didn't button it, revealing the blood-stained shirt underneath. He staggered as he walked, taking the path down the hillside. From the moment Andre Gi had him in sight, until he moved alongside him, Komaeda Nagito had to stop to rest twice, clearly showing that he wasn't in good shape. Seeing Komaeda Nagito like this, Andre Gi, who had already formed a conclusion in his heart, couldn't help but hesitate, doubting whether his judgment was correct. Coming from a military background, Andre Gi had an excellent eyes for assessing an opponent's combat abilities. He could tell at a glance, this person wasn't trained. He probably couldn't even run 1,000 meters within the allotted time. Moreover, the investigation by his subordinates revealed that only one person had gone up the mountain, and there were no others around. This meant this individual was indeed alone, without backup or anyone to assist in combat. As the saying goes, smart people tend to overthink things. Andre Gi found himself in such a state. Instead of dying on the battlefield, Andre Gi, after being provoked like this, temporarily shifted his goal to avenging his subordinates. To do so, he needed to be absolutely sure about his target, which required testing the individual. Compared to the terrifying, dangerous opponent he had imagined, Komaeda Nagito's feeble appearance was quite the opposite, calming Andre Gi down. He was slightly conflicted. Thinking about it calmly, if the ability was really capable of causing a landslide, there was no need to use so much dynamite. Why not just create a landslide at the foot of the mountain and be done with it, instead of taking the trouble to climb up and down? Besides, if an organization had such a powerful ability user, wouldn't they treat him better? Forget about his wretched appearance, they didn't even send a bodyguard. No sensible leader would do something like this. Andre Gi couldn't help but fall into thought. Could it be that he had misunderstood? Maybe this guy didn't even know Mimic was on the mountain. He could have just been experimenting with dynamite, accidentally causing the landslide. Theoretically, there was a slim chance of that happening, and it would be normal if the other party didn't foresee the outcome. As for why he was now descending recklessly, he was just a kid. Perhaps it wasn't because he could control the landslide, but simply because he was unaware of the danger. His previous deductions were based on the assumption that this person was an experienced warrior like him. But suddenly, faced with a frail teenager, despite knowing not to judge a book by its cover, his thoughts inevitably tilted. Andre Gi had always been decisive and ruthless. Others had always described him as cold-blooded. Yet at this moment, he didn't want to kill the opponent directly, he needed answers first. If his subordinate truly died because of an accidental landslide, then it would be excusable. After all, how could anyone go through life without encountering some kind of accident? But if this accident was man-made, then there was no way he could let it go. He had to demand justice for his subordinates to swallow this anger. Of course, Andre Gi was also very cautious. His actions were based on the premise of, what if the opponent's ability actually caused a natural disaster? Right now, he was restraining Komaeda Nagito because he believed that since they were currently in close quarters, even if the other party wanted to use his ability, there would be some hesitation. Andre Gia's questioning was filled with probing intent. As long as the opponent admitted to knowing about Mimic, it was clear that they were indeed targeting them, and there would be no need to ask any further questions about abilities, he could simply kill the target. However, Komaeda Nagito was not a fool. Even though he didn't know exactly what Andre Gi was thinking, he was well aware of how deceptive his own appearance could be. Just now, when the driver had threatened him, he didn't even bother to secure safety precautions, that's how careless he was. That's why Komaeda Nagito managed to take advantage of the situation. In fact, Komaeda Nagito was somewhat hoping that this person was Andre Gi, because he didn't know the names of any other members of Mimic. The only name he knew was this one, and it was that of a famous literary figure from another world. Meeting someone like that could be considered quite fortunate. But at the same time, If this person was truly Andre Gi, then Komaeda Nagito had met a great misfortune. Ordinary accidents probably wouldn't work on someone like him. Even Oda-san had said that Andre Gi possessed foresight abilities. Once he foresaw his own death, he would still have time to deal with Komaeda Nagito beforehand. As a result, Komaeda Nagito, who was usually adept at seeking death, now chose to be a little restrained. Instead, he tried to say, "Should I know you?" Andre Gi tightened his grip on Komaeda Nagito a bit. "Stop pretending. You brought so many bombs, it's not like you came here for sightseeing. What exactly is your ability? You guys really love asking this kind of question, huh? I truly don't have any abilities." Komaeda Nagito said helplessly with a smile. "Do you really think the landslide was caused by my ability? I've never heard of an ability that could cause something like that." Komaeda Nagito said this with genuine sincerity. He could count on one hand the number of ability users he'd met, and those who had demonstrated their abilities in front of him were limited to Dazai Osamu, Ayatsuji Yukito, Mori Ogai, Otasaka no Suke, Natsume Soseki, and Yosano Akiko. Among them, Dazai Osamu's ability had no offensive properties, and Mori Ogai's ability was to turn into a loli, which Komaeda Nagito wasn't even sure was an actual ability. Oda Sakanosuke's offensive strength didn't fully rely on his foresight, he also had many personal combat skills. Yosano Akiko was a healer, and Natsume Soseki had an ability that allowed him to turn into a cat, which seemed to serve no useful purpose other than freeloading food. Even though Ayatsuji Yukito had demonstrated his "you all must die" ability, it was still not impressive enough to alter Komaeda Nagito's understanding of abilities, so his understanding remained somewhat shallow. But Andre Gi was not going to believe that so easily. He adjusted his stance, ready for some serious interrogation. "I won't let you leave here alive. If you truly have no abilities, I will make your death swift. But if you do, you'd better use it quickly, maybe you could even drag me down with you." People always struggle a bit before death, and Andre Gi used these words to provoke Komaeda Nagito, aiming to confirm whether his subordinates had died in vain. Andre Gi raised his fist, showing no mercy, and punched Komaeda Nagito in the stomach. On the spot, Komaeda Nagito coughed up blood. But in the next second, Andre Gi instinctively jumped several steps to the side, stopping only when he was about 5 or 6 meters away from Komaeda Nagito. Because at the moment when he threw that punch, he saw a future vision, a gunshot rang out, and both he and Komaeda Nagito were hit by the bullet. Since his coat wasn't buttoned, the gun's aim was diverted, grazing Komaeda Nagito, but it hit Andre Gi directly in the heart. He dodged in time, and the bullet hit no one, but because of his push, the bullet hit Komaeda Nagito. At this moment, Komaeda Nagito lay in a pool of blood, and it was unclear whether the blood in his mouth was from Gia's punch or from being shot. Seeing the scene before him, Andre Gi was a bit confused. Huh? He hadn't even really started yet, and this guy had already fallen? The person behind the gun even forgot to put the safety on. Maybe he had overestimated his opponent. Chapter 77 End. Chapter 78, Gia's Death and Dazai's Arrival. Andre Gi looked at Komaeda Nagito, who was lying on the ground, and the gun that had fallen out of his coat pocket, feeling deeply conflicted. When you're not planning to fire, you put the safety on, that's the most basic common sense. He never thought he'd live to see such a foolish mistake. He had fought in many battles, and, to die at peace, he chose formidable opponents. It had been a long time since he saw such a rookie mistake, and he found himself a bit unaccustomed. Komaeda Nagito, on the other hand, adapted well. He had placed his gun casually in his coat pocket, wagering his luck. The coat wasn't buttoned, and after Komaeda Nagito was hit, the coat had moved several times due to inertia, leading to an accidental discharge. Everything had been fine until that point. But this time, things went wrong. As Komaeda Nagito coughed, he couldn't help but laugh. The shot looked severe, but in reality, it wasn't worse than the one he got today in front of Yosano Akiko, where he had a bullet wound. At least after the blood entered his windpipe, he coughed it up without it affecting his ability to speak. Ha, ha ha ha. After Komaeda Nagito fell, his head bled a little, and the blood brushed past his right eye, dyeing his eyelashes red, adding an aggressive gleam to his already wild eyes. Fantastic. Was that foresight just now? Andre Gia's movements were sudden. He had been holding Komaeda Nagito from behind, but it was clear that he had suddenly loosened his grip just before the gunfire. Recalling what Oda Sakanosuke had said about Andre Gi and his ability, Komaeda Nagito finally confirmed that this person who survived was indeed Andre Gi. This discovery made Komaeda Nagito's blood boil. For a moment, he almost forgot his purpose, to clean up an environment for Oda Sakanosuke to ride in peace. He seemed to forget what Andre Gi had just done to him, and couldn't stop admiring his opponent. His voice was still trembling in pain, but his spirit was high. Truly amazing. Cough, cough. Isn't this just my misfortune at work? Ha 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 ha. Andre Gi frowned, his anger, which had abated somewhat, flared up once again. So he knows about my ability and that it involves foresight. It seemed like he had specifically come for Mimic. I misjudged him. Although Gi had no idea what his opponent was relying on to come up the mountain alone, he wasn't planning to ask. The guy's mental state seemed a bit off. Maybe there was no plan at all, just pure lunacy leading him to do this. Besides, earlier, the other guy didn't even admit to having an ability, so asking was useless. It'd be better to just kill him and see if any last-minute revelations occurred. When it's time to die, people tend to get honest. Andre Gi pulled his pistol from its holster and aimed it at Komaeda Nagito. Komaeda Nagito finally stopped laughing, but there was still a smile on his face as he tilted his head to look at Andre Gi. Listening to his heavy, labored breathing through the pain and seeing his body stiffen, it was clear that he couldn't move much at the moment. Andre Gi didn't understand how Komaeda Nagito still had the leisure to talk just now. If he were in the same condition, he'd be holding back the pain and trying to pick up his gun again. But after all, it wasn't his job to educate his enemies. He just felt that it was incredibly unfair for his men to have died because of someone who was afraid of pain yet mentally unhinged, making him feel a sense of absurdity. Now, he would use his enemy's blood to wash away the humiliation. He pressed the trigger. Click. At the unexpected sound, Andre Gi was stunned. His pistol had jammed. No matter how unreliable Komaeda Nagito seemed, even Andre Gi realized something was wrong. A gun is crucial for a soldier, and he maintained it every day. He even inspected it today before heading up the mountain. He had found nothing wrong. Yet now, it jammed. And then there was the landslide. After decades without incident, something happened today. Oh, and earlier, the gun fired at the other guy. At first, he thought it was because his opponent hadn't put on the safety, but after tallying up all the accidents today, Andre Gi realized that something wasn't quite right. If he hadn't known to dodge and push at the right time, the bullet would have gone past the target and hit someone else. One accident could be a coincidence, but a chain of accidents. Andre Gi tensed up. He pressed the trigger a few more times towards Komaeda Nagito, finding that the gun is still jammed, so he decided to change direction to test it. Now aware that the opponent might be linked to these accidents, he dared not approach as casually as before. Who knew what might happen? He suspected that his opponent's ability might increase the likelihood of accidents, and the previous kidnapping only succeeded because the opponent hadn't yet reacted. Given the opponent's novice-like behavior, this assumption seemed plausible. Andre Gi had just aimed in a direction, but before pulling the trigger, a foresight image appeared. In the foresight, he managed to fire a shot, but the impact triggered an explosion somewhere, followed by a chain reaction. The ground beneath his feet erupted. Andre Gi froze, the hairs on his neck standing on end. Why are there so many bombs here? Is that another coincidence? Komaeda Nagito, wanting an easier way down the mountain, disregarded the danger and moved closer to the stone steps that led to the western mansion. In other words, they were not far from the western mansion. There were even traces of landslide debris due to the heavy rain, just beside the steps. After all, Andre Guy had taken quite a risk when he came out. Once he confirmed the area was clear, he headed straight upward. The accident site wasn't that far to begin with. And upon noticing Komai de Nagito's movements, he deliberately moved closer to the stone steps. As a result, their current position wasn't exactly safe. Andre Guy considered and couldn't help but wonder, could the bombs here have been dislodged from the mansion during the landslide? If so, it would make sense that when he was in a lower position, with the landslide coming from above, debris from the mansion could have been swept to this location. Thinking this over, even Andre Guy couldn't stay calm. Why didn't any of the bombs explode along the way? The quality must be incredible. Were they all just waiting for this one shot to trigger an explosion and kill him? Andre Guy became extra cautious, refraining from attempting to fire. After what he had seen, there was no point in wasting bullets unnecessarily. He even suspected that if he fired a shot into the sky, it could hit something and set off a bomb. So that's how it is. Andre Guy looked at the weak, pitiful, yet resilient Komai de Nagito with wary eyes, no longer holding a trace of disdain. This is basically Final Destination, being targeted, surrounded by dangers from all directions, with every move potentially a step toward doom. In this situation, his subordinates didn't exactly die due to an accident. This was another kind of battlefield. Andre Guy said with a complex tone, "This is your ability, huh? Now that I think about it, they didn't die in vain." Komai de Nagito. Andre Guy's thoughts moved fast, and to Komai de Nagito, it seemed like he had just lifted his gun and suddenly came out with this incomprehensible statement. But Komai de Nagito's mind worked well. Despite his current pain and foggy consciousness, he quickly understood what the other meant. Komai de Nagito gritted his teeth, struggling to sit up, and spoke with difficulty. "Though I don't know what you saw. But, for you to think so highly of me, I really don't deserve to be called an ability user. Whether you admit it or not doesn't matter. I want to finish you off right here, then go find Oda Sakanosuke. Ha ha ha. If it means I can keep you from bothering Oda-san while he chases his deadlines, then I'll gladly accept total defeat. So it's because of Oda Sakanosuke, huh? I see, you must be a friend of Oda Sakanosuke. If I kill you, will Oda Sakanosuke break his no-killing principle?" Andre Guy wasn't actually much of a talker, but in front of Oda Sakanosuke, he could chat about Mimic's ambitions, trying to pull Oda Sakanosuke in. However, when it came to anyone else, he had little to say. Only Komai de Nagito really shook Andre Guy, especially since it involved Oda Sakanosuke. That's why he couldn't help but say a few more words, without expecting a reply from Komai de Nagito. Now he felt he had confirmed his answer, and had no need to speak further. He fully concentrated on his plan to take Komai de Nagito's life here in this dangerous game, ensuring he could then find Oda Sakanosuke. After all, he felt that Komai de Nagito could give him an exciting death, but it still wasn't quite what he wanted. He looked forward even more to a death filled with joy while battling Oda Sakanosuke. The air was damp and cold, the dark clouds hung low, and the rumbling sound heralded yet another downpour. Andre Guy quickly calculated the current distance and how much time he needed to lunge over and break Komai de Nagito's neck, all while predicting any unexpected incidents. Just as he finally decided on a way to kill Komai de Nagito, a foresight flashed before his eyes. Right under Andre Guy's nose, Komai de Nagito, with complete ease, tried to pick up the gun that was just a bit out of reach. But in that moment, Komai de Nagito's legs failed, and he couldn't stand up. Losing balance, his body fell again, with one hand pressing down on his coat. The problem was, when Komai de Nagito threw the backpack full of explosives aside, he'd already taken out the remote control and kept it on himself. So even though the bag rolled away, the remote control hadn't been tossed with it, he'd casually slipped it into his pocket instead. After all, carelessly throwing around random junk wasn't exactly good manners. Yes, that was right. At that moment, Komai de Nagito found himself thinking about proper etiquette again, though that only made him seem even more abnormal. The remote control, of course, was not unprotected. The button had a transparent plastic cover over it. Earlier, when he fell, the cover had already cracked, but since it was in his pocket, no one noticed. Now, when he slipped again, the already broken plastic cover completely shattered, and he pressed the button directly. And so, the scene that played out in Andre Gia's foresight was of Komaeda Nagito tripping, his hand pausing on something, and suddenly the bomb detonated, setting off a chain reaction and blowing both of them up. Andre Gi didn't have X-ray vision, so of course, he didn't know what the remote control looked like. In the end, both versions, with or without the protective cover, looked pretty standard. And so, in that instant, Andre Gi completely lost it. You've got to be kidding. Leaving a gun with the safety off in your pocket is one thing, but are you really going to be this careless with the bomb's detonator? Even if you threw away the bomb, couldn't you have discarded the detonator too? And why must it always be like this, with the bomb so conveniently nearby? Can't your ability make a little sense? The odds are just ridiculous. However, frustration aside, stopping it was still the priority. Knowing that foresight didn't take long, as soon as he realized what might happen, Andre Gi planned to immediately lunge over and break Komaeda Nagito's neck, stopping this accident from occurring. He quickly analyzed his foresight, confirmed several danger points, and finally found a safe route, moving toward Komaeda Nagito with confidence. But, as if fate were playing a cruel joke, when he arrived at Komaeda Nagito's side, just in time to twist his arm away from the remote control, even using his own momentum from avoiding an exploding bomb to seize Komaeda Nagito by the neck and pin him down. Just as he attempted to crush his windpipe. Suddenly, from the overcast sky came a dazzling lightning strike, instantly igniting the nearby bomb. Impossible. How could this happen? He didn't foresee this. In the midst of this natural phenomenon, so grand and beyond human control, the nearness of the lightning created an instinctive fear, as if awakening a primal terror. Andre Gia's heart almost seemed to freeze for a moment before everything was engulfed in explosions. Andre Gi, only in the moment of his death, understood why he hadn't seen this future. In fact, he had seen it, in the image that appeared to him, that bolt of lightning happened during Komaeda Nagito's explosion. But because the intense flash from the explosion blocked his view, he hadn't spotted the lightning in the nearly blinding scene. After all, his foresights were not like a video that could be paused and replayed to see the details. This future hadn't changed until he twisted Komaeda Nagito's arm, stopping that foresight from occurring. Thus, the future shifted, from the bomb buried under the mud being detonated by Komaeda Nagito to it being set off by the lightning. But by then, the lightning strike had already arrived, the speed of light so fast that the foresight and reality occurred simultaneously before Andre Gia's eyes. In other words, even if he wanted to change the future, there was no way to act. Andre Gi, the leader and the last surviving member of Mimic, died. As a man with a foresight ability, his death was complicated and intricate, but in the end, he died in grand fashion. Meanwhile, as Komaeda Nagito descended the mountain, he saw those people who had come, standing on the stone steps, watching as a lightning bolt as thick as an arm struck, followed by an immediate and violent explosion that lit up half the sky. Not good. Someone among those climbing the mountain shouted, "It might trigger a landslide. We should get out of here." Many people shared the same thought, and the once orderly team buzzed with noise, until a calm voice sounded. "Quiet down. Dazai-sama." The people were members of the port mafia. After figuring out the Mimic's headquarters, Dazai-Osamu immediately went to Mori Ogai, intending to get rid of trouble for his friend Oda Sakanosuke as soon as possible. But Mori Ogai had delayed him again and again, refusing to let him lead a team there. While Dazai-Osamu argued with Mori Ogai, he grew anxious and checked on Komaeda Nagito's location. Yes, Dazai-Osamu had planted a tracker on Komaeda Nagito. Previously, he had never done anything like that, because Komaeda Nagito's actions were rather predictable. Even when there were surprises, it was all because of accidents. But yesterday, he noticed Komaeda Nagito seemed to be entertaining some dangerous thoughts, and suspected that he intended to get involved with the Mimic, so he cautiously placed a tracker on him. It was meant as a precaution, but when Dazai-Osamu checked, his face turned pale. Komaeda Nagito's location was now showing up at the Mimic's headquarters in the mountains. What is it, Dazai-kun? Mori Ogai asked casually, have you found a reason to convince me? I really don't want us to lose too many people from the port mafia, after all, we're short-handed. I've found it. Dazai-Osamu gritted his teeth, I want to save my friend. Mori Ogai raised his eyebrows, surprised. Oh, does Oda Saku intend to kill someone? It's not Oda Saku. Dazai-Osamu coldly showed the tracker's screen to Mori Ogai. It's Komaeda-kun. He's with Mimic right now. Mori Ogai. At that moment, Mori Ogai even broke into a rare cold sweat. Can I go now? Mori Ogai quickly began calculating, weighing the pros and cons, and a few seconds later replied. You can. I'm also very worried about Komaeda-kun. Please make sure Komaeda-kun comes back safe, alright? Dazai-Osamu turned and left. Because of what he learned, Mori Ogai couldn't sit still anymore. He felt that something was about to happen, fearing that all his plans were about to be disrupted. Sure enough, not long after, news of a landslide at the Mimic's mountain headquarters reached him. Mori Ogai's first thought was, this must have been Komaeda-kun's doing. Unlike Komaeda Nagito and Andre Gi who were unfamiliar with each other, Mori Ogai was well aware that Komaeda Nagito was not an ability user. Yet, he dared not underestimate him, treating him as a walking calamity. After all, the impression of that meteor left a deep mark on Mori Ogai's mind. He believed that if Komaeda Nagito wanted, he could bring about a landslide. In fact, based on Komaeda Nagito's usual behavior, Mori Ogai thought that if an apocalypse happened, Komaeda-kun would surely be the last one to die. However, since a landslide is such a large-scale accident, Mori Ogai couldn't help but worry. Would Komaeda Nagito be buried? Though Mori Ogai could be ruthless when plotting against people, he hesitated to reveal Mimic's location to others for Komaeda Nagito's sake. He certainly hoped that his junior would be fine. The probability wasn't high, but just in case, he hoped Dazai-kun would make it in time. If he had refused Dazai-Osamu's request for help earlier, who knows how unlucky he would be now. Due to Komaeda Nagito's unpredictable luck, even Mori Ogai couldn't grasp what the future would hold. There was simply no way to calculate it. What? The skilled business permit? Komaeda-kun's accidents never failed. With such a large scale, probably half of Mimic's members were already down. If everything went smoothly, Komaeda-kun might even be considered a legitimate executive of the port mafia. Naturally, the credit would go to the port mafia. After all, rumors about Dazai-kun and Komaeda-kun from back then had spread widely. If he said so, the special division would believe it. What? He originally wanted to take this opportunity to kick Dazai-Osamu out, disassociate him from the port mafia? As long as they fooled the special division before Dazai-Osamu escaped, obtaining the skilled business permit, Dazai-Osamu's subsequent actions wouldn't matter. As for Komaeda Nagito, even if he were crippled, it wouldn't be an issue. As long as he had a breath left, Mori Ogai could still face Natsume-sensei with a clear conscience. After all, wasn't Yosano Akiko still with Fukuzawa Yukichi? If little junior's in trouble, as his senior, was he supposed to just stand by and watch his junior ruin his life trying to take on a terrorist group? Surely he had to step in, right? Pull Komaeda-kun back from near death, restoring him fully. It was practically a win-win. He had picked up a benefit for free. This junior disciple, Natsume-sensei, really chose wisely. Mori Ogai thought contentedly, completely unaware of the blow he was about to face. Regardless of what dreams Mori Ogai had, Dazai-Osamu brushed aside the objections, refusing to turn back, even taking the lead to climb the mountain. His hurried demeanor left even the members of the port mafia whispering among themselves. The site where lightning struck wasn't far from them. Debris from the mountain clattered down, taking a while to settle. Finally, Dazai-Osamu saw the explosion site. Almost instantly, he spotted a human figure. He had been running already, but now he accelerated, sprinting towards that person, praying it wasn't Komai-de-kun, even though, deep down, he already knew the answer. After all, lightning wouldn't strike so precisely in an inhabited place. Komai-de-kun. Dazai-osamu knelt down on one knee beside the figure, and then, with one hand, threw the corpse aside. Those from the port mafia following behind him were dumbfounded. Wait a minute, Komai-de-kun. Dazai-sama's rumored partner? Why was Dazai-sama treating his rumored partner's body so roughly? They all stopped in their tracks, not daring to step forward. Wait, there's someone underneath. Upon this sharp observation, the others finally noticed, underneath that body, there was indeed someone else. Komai-de-kun. Dazai-osamu's hand trembled slightly as he touched the person's face, too afraid to check their pulse or breathing right away. It was this face, just last night in front of him, that had fallen into a peaceful sleep. He had even carried him back to his room himself. Now he lay quietly, his eyes closed, almost the same as the previous night, as if he would wake up at any moment, smiling and saying he had accidentally fallen asleep. Dazai-osamu extended his hand to feel for a breath. Don't joke around, where's your luck? His voice was hoarse. Is this what you want? To die for Oda-saka's hope? Then what about me? What about letting me use you, like we agreed? Then let me use you. This is so strange. Everyone said that I would die before you. I believed that too. So why are you lying here now? How infuriating. Always saying I'm hope, yet you gave me hope only to take it away. It was you all along. If you really die like this, I will never forgive you. Chapter 78 End. Chapter 79, Bonus Good News. According to the process of verifying life and death, not feeling any breath or carotid pulse, Dazai-osamu, who hadn't completely lost hope, was about to lie down to listen for a heartbeat when suddenly a somewhat familiar female voice, as if he had heard it somewhere before, appeared beside him. Move aside. Dazai-osamu suddenly looked up, and realized it was Yosano Akiko, the very same person he had met back then at the Armed Detective Agency. After the incident, thank you for calling to warn me about Komai-de-kun's car incident. He knew the woman was a doctor, so when she grabbed his shoulder and pushed him aside, he didn't resist, naturally letting go of Komai-de-Nagito's hand. It wasn't until this moment that the sounds around him finally reached Dazai-osamu's ears again. He turned his head, and saw, to his surprise, a helicopter nearby, with members from the Armed Detective Agency negotiating with members of the Port Mafia to prevent them from approaching. Though Dazai-osamu's head was still somewhat numb, his mind finally started working. The Armed Detective Agency had actually arrived, and their target seemed to be Komai-de-kun. But what relation could Komai-de-kun have to them, after coming here? It couldn't possibly be because of Kudo Shinichi. Had Komai-de-kun done something again? Dazai-osamu lost his composure for just that moment, but by now, he looked very much like the Port Mafia's Dazai-sama, who had regained his senses, his mind racing. Yosano Akiko kicked away the obstacle that was Dazai-osamu without even bothering to check Komai-de-Nagito's condition, immediately using her ability. Her ability, Thou Shalt Not Die, could only be used when the target was near death. If Komai-de-Nagito was already close to death, wasting a few seconds to check his condition might delay the time for treatment, and she couldn't revive a person from death. It was more efficient to use her ability directly to save him. If her ability failed, there were only two possibilities. 1. The person was already dead. In this situation, there would be no need to do anything further. 2. The person was not yet near death, which was actually good news, and in that case, she could continue treating them. Yosano Akiko was very tense. On the way here, she had heard Ranpo and the president say that the strange boy who had pointed a gun at himself today was actually the president's junior disciple. Though it was supposed to be a secret, they had to tell her why she was called in to save the person who had been so rude today, as long as she didn't tell anyone afterward. Though as a doctor, she would save anyone if she decided to save them, regardless of the patient's identity, Yosano Akiko's heart wasn't made of stone. Seeing the usually calm and dignified president looking so faintly anxious, she felt it necessary to reach Komai de Nagito before it was too late. In other words, even if the president was reasonable enough to know the dead couldn't be brought back, she still didn't want to see the president heartbroken over his junior disciple's death. With Yosano Akiko's ability at work, the marks on Komai de Nagito's neck seemed to recede in reverse time, and the burned skin revealed beneath the torn clothing began to heal and become fair once again. This indicated that her ability was taking effect. Seeing this result, Yosano Akiko immediately relaxed, feeling an immense sense of relief. He had really been near death. Perhaps if they had been even 1 second slower, he wouldn't have made it. Dazai Osamu, standing closest, instinctively stepped forward, but immediately realized it and stepped back, giving room for her ability to work. He watched Yosano Akiko treat Komai de Nagito, suddenly speaking. I couldn't feel a carotid pulse, and he wasn't breathing either. You're not actually dumb, so how could you ask such a stupid question? Edogawa Ranpo, who had just come over to see the situation, heard Dazai Osamu say this and couldn't help but roll his eyes. Your fingers were probably numb by then, weren't they? Dazai Osamu was stunned. Edogawa Ranpo looked at Dazai Osamu, revealing an understanding expression. Worry can cause confusion. It must have been the mechanical constriction of breath leading to a false death. Yosano Akiko had also heard their conversation. Based on the condition she observed, she judged, in this kind of situation, breathing and heartbeat become very faint. Since your fingers were numb, not feeling it would be normal. When someone is excessively worried or extremely tense, as a self-preservation response, a lot of blood flow is directed to the primary organs, and the extremities, like hands and feet, are sacrificed. This can result in shaky hands, numb fingers, and numb legs. This was actually common knowledge for someone like Dazai Osamu, but as Edogawa Ranpo said, worry can make you lose clarity, and he needed someone to remind him before he understood what was wrong. Dazai Osamu couldn't help but feel rare embarrassment, covering his face with one hand. Forget it. Is Komai de-kun okay? He's fine. Yosano Akiko relaxed her hands. Seeing Komai de Nagito's eyelashes begin to flutter, she completely relaxed as well, even having the energy to bring up old matters. She looked at Dazai Osamu, squinting slightly. Now that I think of it, I think I met you before. The phone I picked up, wasn't it this kid's? It was his, Dazai Osamu admitted frankly. It really is a small world. Yosano Akiko. Titch. At this moment, Komai de Nagito had already opened his eyes. As if he hadn't fully come back to his senses, he held his head and sat up. Am I dreaming? Dr. Yosano. I never expected you to be here as well, so that means I really almost died just now. Hahaha, it's good that you made it in time. My luck really is good. Yosano Akiko rolled her eyes. Don't reduce everyone's efforts to good luck like that. The world doesn't revolve around you, but, yeah, you were pretty lucky. Her gaze briefly swept over Andre Gia's body, which Dazai Osamu had thrown aside. That guy was almost blown to bits, yet you weren't too badly hurt. You nearly suffocated to death instead. Edogawa Ranpo cut in, saying, he must have been strangling him when the bomb exploded, just happened to act as this guy's shield. Pretty lucky, alright. Poor Andre Gi, even after death, his body had become a sign of Komai de Nagito's luck. Blocking a blow for him, if he could know of this in the afterlife, he probably wouldn't rest in peace. Despite the surroundings changing due to the explosion, Komai de Nagito had figured out the situation. He stood up, smiling at Dazai Osamu, who stood a little further back behind Yosano Akiko. Didn't expect Dazai-kun to be here too. Ahaha, this really is embarrassing. I originally thought I'd just do my thing quietly and head home, but now so many people have come. It's kind of over the top. Fukuzawa Yukichi, who had been dealing with the port mafia people, saw Komai de Nagito sit up and knew he was fine. He was just about to walk over when he heard that, and he couldn't help but mutter under his breath. We're over the top. Isn't the landslide earlier more over the top? But no matter what, the fact that Komaeda Nagito was still alive was good. When Fukuzawa Yukichi had seen Dazai Osamu kneeling earlier, he had thought they had come too late. Looking at Komaeda Nagito's obedient expression, Fukuzawa Yukichi sighed, "It's good that you're okay. Everyone was very worried about you." "Sorry, and thank you for saving me." Komaeda Nagito knew that Fukuzawa Yukichi was talking about Natsume-sensei, but he didn't even need to look at his phone to know it was probably broken, unsure if the contacts could still be used. Hopefully I haven't caused sensei too much trouble. If Dostoevsky gets involved, what if it affects his fishing plans? Completely unconcerned with what would have happened if he died, Komaeda Nagito, fully recovered, appeared mentally well again, smiling brightly without a trace of the chaos just moments ago. Yosano Akiko, seeing Komaeda Nagito in this state of mind after nearly dying twice in one day without any lingering psychological shadows, could only admire his resilience. Right, there's also Dazai-kun. After finishing with his senior, Komaeda Nagito looked toward Dazai Osamu, who was standing a bit farther away, and said, "Sorry for the trouble, but Andre Gi is dead, so it counts as helping, doesn't it?" Dazai Osamu stared at him, standing still, then asked Yosano Akiko, "Just curious, what's the principle behind your ability?" Yosano Akiko frowned slightly. She didn't like having too many people know the details of her ability. The other agency members had mainly come here to prevent the port mafia from getting too close. When Yosano Akiko saw Dazai Osamu's mental state upon arriving, she knew right away, it was impossible to make him stay away. What's more, the rescue was a race against time, so she had to use her ability right in front of him. But in truth, because Mori Ogai was now the boss of the port mafia, Yosano Akiko couldn't help but hold a certain prejudice toward the organization. "Is your ability a contact-type nullification?" At this moment, Edogawa Ranpo was the one to see through the truth. "Don't worry, Yosano's ability won't lose its effect just because you touch him." Only then did Dazai Osamu move quickly forward, removing his coat and covering the seated Komaeda Nagito with it. After all, while Yosano Akiko's ability could heal someone, it had no way of repairing the clothes that were torn to shreds from the explosion. It had just finished raining, and the air was damp and cold. With Komaeda Nagito dressed like that, exposed to the wind, it was only a matter of time before he caught a cold. Thank you, that's just what I needed." Komaeda Nagito accepted the coat naturally. "I was just about to say I felt a bit cold. Dazai-kun?" Dazai Osamu remained expressionless. "I have some matters to handle. Let the armed detective agency take you home." After such a drastic change in mood, Dazai Osamu currently felt inexplicably embarrassed to face Komaeda Nagito. He wanted to be alone and in peace. Besides, he had come under the pretense of official business, bringing along members of the port mafia, only to toss them aside the moment they arrived and ignore them completely. Though he had long been thinking of running away, right now he still had to properly finish what needed to be done. For example, silencing them. Not everyone knew about Komaeda-kun's miraculous luck, but if they casually blabbed about it, it wouldn't be long before someone connected Komaeda-kun's presence here with the landslide today, and that wouldn't do him any good. Expecting anything from Mori Ogai was out of the question. He currently had no trust in Mori Ogai whatsoever. Just for the sake of a skilled business permit, he deliberately brought Mimic to Japan, and intended to eliminate him, Oda Sakanosuke, and the undercover member of the Special Division, Sakaguchi Ango, all in one go. It was truly impressive how Mori Ogai managed to devise such a plan, but sooner or later, those who were too clever would fall victim to their own schemes. Dazai Osamu tried to let his mind be occupied with work, finally feeling some peace. "Let's go." Fukuzawa Yukichi could see that Dazai Osamu probably wanted to stay busy for a while, so he came over and patted Komaeda Nagito's shoulder. "Get on the helicopter." Komaeda Nagito smiled and said goodbye to Dazai Osamu as if nothing had happened, then boarded the helicopter with the members of the armed detective agency. He looked down from the window and could still see Dazai Osamu giving commands. Thinking of the vehicles he had seen earlier through binoculars, Komaeda Nagito suddenly asked, "Does the port mafia not have a helicopter?" "Actually, this helicopter isn't from the armed detective agency either," Fukuzawa Yukichi replied. "I borrowed it from someone. As for the port mafia, the port mafia doesn't have one." The person who answered was Edogawa Ranpo, and it wasn't out of enthusiasm. He just immaturely beat Fukuzawa Yukichi to the response, as if he didn't want Fukuzawa Yukichi and Komaeda Nagito to get too close. "They had one before, but I think they must have sold it." Yosano Akiko, who had never heard of this before and originally had no interest in the port mafia, now happily inquired, why would they sell it? The expenses of the Dragon's Head conflict were too great. That 500 billion yen inheritance was like a banner, no one even knows if it truly existed. Edogawa Ranpo explained. So many people died, and just the condolence payments were a huge amount. Although they later merged with some smaller organizations, everyone went broke during the Dragon's Head conflict. Not accumulating collective debts during the mergers was already a blessing, and given the means they used to make money, let's just say it was bad timing, they merged during the poorest period. Yosano Akiko almost burst out laughing. So they sold their helicopter. After all, just maintaining it costs a lot of money. Once the Dragon's Head conflict was over, the helicopter was no longer particularly necessary, so of course, they wanted to cut expenses starting with the smallest details. Selling it was more beneficial, why wouldn't they sell it? Work-related payments couldn't be cut, and morale needed to be maintained. This was the time to win people's hearts. Cutting those costs would only spur rebellion. The budget for weapons couldn't be reduced either, that's their basic survival. Selling their cars wasn't an option, they used them frequently, and the moment they fell in quality, everyone would know that the port mafia was broke. That wasn't just a matter of pride, it was a security issue. If the already weakened organizations found out that, the port mafia has no money, they can't fight, let's strike now. After stabilizing Yokohama's underworld with great difficulty, if things stirred up again just because the port mafia replaced their cars with cheaper ones, it would truly be laughable. All things considered, the helicopters were the only feasible option. During the Dragon's Head conflict, they could still make use of them for some airborne chaos. But now, with the special division keeping a close watch, until they got the skilled business permit, the port mafia had to put on a good show. Keeping helicopters around would mean they'd be nothing more than regular transportation, when you think about how often they'd use them in daily life, and add the expenses for civilian airspace. After taking over, Mori Ogai had already been frustrated enough filling the huge budgetary gaps left behind. Deciding to sell off those helicopters was a straightforward choice. Even though the money earned was just a drop in the bucket, it was better than nothing. Plus, when considering maintenance costs, it was totally worth it. Besides, those helicopters had all been purchased during the previous boss's time. By the time Mori Ogai needed them, they'd be long expired, it was better to cash them in quickly and buy something more advanced later. They've even partnered with Tei Corporation, and yet the port mafia is still short on money? Komaeda Nagito, knowing quite a bit, couldn't help but ask. This time it was Yosano Akiko who replied, "Komaeda-kun, you don't understand, money is never enough for an organization like that. Especially for large organizations like the Port Mafia, which had too many places that needed funding. Tei Corporation wasn't stupid enough to be bled dry for nothing, so of course, they wouldn't cover all the costs. If the helicopters had been cut, it meant they were not important." Komaeda Nagito seemed to understand. Edogawa Ranpo snorted. "Yosano, it's useless telling him. He's never short of money, he can just casually pick up a winning lottery ticket anytime." On their way, Natsume Soseki finally handed over Komaeda Nagito's file to Fukuzawa Yukichi. Once Fukuzawa Yukichi finished reading, Edogawa Ranpo took a look. By the time they were done, they'd reached their destination, which meant Yosano Akiko still didn't know much about Komaeda Nagito's elaborate background. Yosano Akiko was stunned, and her gaze at Komaeda Nagito turned a bit peculiar. "Is your ability perhaps golden luck?" "Unfortunately, I'm not an ability user. Komaeda Nagito smiled bitterly in denial. Even Andre Gi insisted I was, but I really am not. Although Yosano Akiko had been informed about Komaeda Nagito's connection with Fukuzawa Yukichi as senior and junior, she hadn't known about his link to the landslide, and she couldn't help but complain now. Then why did you go to such a dangerous place alone? Even if you knew I could heal you, you still needed to make it back alive to the detective agency. If Rampo hadn't figured out where you were and brought me there, you'd be dead by now. The more Dr. Yosano spoke, the more agitated she became. The thing she hated most was people thinking, Yosano Akiko is here, so I'll be fine, and then disregarding their own lives. That was trampling on the value of life. If it happens again, I'm not saving you. You need to cherish your own life. Komaeda Nagito didn't seem upset at all, putting on a very obedient expression, nodding as he listened. One would think Yosano Akiko was giving a school lecture. Ah, Yosano Akiko. The embodiment of hope, worrying so much for someone she'd only met once. He really was so fortunate. Edogawa Ranpo let out a huff and took out a snack to eat. He knew it, Komaeda Nagito's personality would definitely draw everyone's attention because that guy just wouldn't stop causing trouble. But Ranpo-sama was a mature adult, after all, and wouldn't hold grudges against kids. Fukuzawa Yukichi wasn't good at dealing with people like Komaeda Nagito, so he was happy to see Yosano Akiko help educate his junior. He simply listened quietly, not planning to intervene. Suddenly, he noticed some commotion below. The helicopter had flown out of the mountains and was now above a residential area. But Fukuzawa Yukichi could see ambulances and fire trucks on the scene. Edogawa Ranpo glanced in Fukuzawa Yukichi's direction, casually saying, the landslide caused an earthquake. There was some impact on the surrounding area, but it stopped quickly, so it shouldn't be too severe. Fukuzawa Yukichi nodded. It looked like only one building had collapsed. Hopefully, no one inside was hurt. The helicopter flew over the residential area, and at this moment, no one knew that besides the earthquake causing buildings to collapse, there were other consequences beneath. Even Komaeda Nagito only learned of the seismic activity the next day. Because Komaeda Nagito's phone was broken, it was Fukuzawa Yukichi who handled notifying people that they were safe. Komaeda Nagito himself had been thrown back home, and Oda Sakanosuke was assigned by Dazai Osamu to keep an eye on Komaeda Nagito, just in case he did something again. Komaeda Nagito felt incredibly innocent. Oda-san, aren't you chasing a deadline? I can do it here. Ah, could it be that Dazai arranged for me to come here so I could chase my manuscript? How sneaky. Anyway, Dazai Osamu didn't come back that night, but Oda Sakanosuke, who was clearly familiar with the place, set up the guest room on the second floor for himself, looking as if he was used to doing housework. Therefore, when Komaeda Nagito woke up the next day and saw a cat in his bedroom, his first reaction was surprise. Sensei, what happened? Oda-san is also here. To risk being discovered and still rush over, just what kind of serious trouble has happened? Ah. The calico cat transformed into its human form. This old man knows. Not only did he know, but he had just eaten Oda Sakanosuke's cat food. Otherwise, he really wouldn't have been able to get through the door. The place was locked tightly, truly befitting a former assassin. Komaeda Nagito, although not psychologically scarred, was mentally a bit tired, so he slept until midday. He didn't manage to catch breakfast, but since Natsume Soseki was here, eating could wait. Komaeda Nagito knelt on the bed, seriously waiting for Natsume Soseki. Look at this photo. Natsume Soseki took a photo out of his pocket. This is someone who was brought to the hospital by an emergency vehicle yesterday. Have you seen him before? Komaeda Nagito took the photo and immediately nodded. Yes, it's him. How did he end up in the hospital? Natsume Soseki's expression was complicated. It's a long story. This matter is a bit of a coincidence, and it's related to the landslide yesterday. Your senior said that Yosano Akiko had already scolded you, so this old man won't repeat it. Anyway, if you really want to face such a situation again, go ahead. Talking to you doesn't help. It was clear that Natsume Soseki was very familiar with Komaeda Nagito's stubborn, death-defying attitude. Komaeda Nagito smiled shyly. Sorry for worrying you, sensei. Next time, I'll do even better. No, just don't do anything. Halfway through his sentence, Natsume Soseki suddenly remembered something, and with a somewhat conflicted expression, he swallowed his words. Anyway, don't almost die like this again. It's too dangerous, at least don't go alone. Komaeda Nagito sharply noticed Natsume Soseki's subtle attitude, raising his eyebrows. Does that mean this Russian emergency incident has something to do with me? Yesterday's landslide triggered a minor earthquake. Natsume Soseki spoke while rubbing his forehead. It caused a building nearby to collapse. This person might be Dostoevsky, buried in the ruins. Based on the scene. Natsume Soseki's expression looked quite speechless. It seems he was in the basement of that collapsed building. Komaeda Nagito. Chapter 79 End. Chapter 80, A Dose of Peculiar News. Komaeda Nagito and Natsume Soseki looked at each other, and for a moment neither of them thought to speak. After a long while, Komaeda Nagito finally opened his mouth hesitantly. Is there a chance that this person is not the Dostoevsky you're looking for? Natsume Soseki sighed. There is indeed that possibility, so for now. Before he could finish his words, Natsume Soseki suddenly reached into his pocket and took out his phone. It seems there's some news. Komaeda Nagito. Although he didn't know what the news was about, Komaeda Nagito could tell that Natsume-sensei was quite busy. Even though he had retired for many years, how was it that he still couldn't seem to get any rest? Seeing Komaeda Nagito's puzzled look, Natsume Soseki's heart was full of exasperation. Did people think that after retirement he didn't want to relax, enjoy his leisure time, and live a peaceful little life? He wished he could. Just after retiring, he had also enjoyed some easy days, becoming a cat basking in the sun, living comfortably, secretly observing, and quietly grading his disciples. Then the Dragon's Head conflict happened. The Dragon's Head conflict could be overlooked. At first everyone thought it was all because of that 500 billion inheritance, but after a year, the government discovered evidence showing there was something more sinister behind it. And that led to Demon Dostoevsky. Only when it came to this point, even Natsume Soseki was merely acting as an overly capable retiree, got called up just to serve as an advisor. Until he discovered Komaeda Nagito, and then, based on the after-effects of Komaeda Nagito's memory fusion, he came up with a plan. Such a far-reaching plan to hook a big fish was different from the tripartite framework. With the tripartite framework, he could find suitable individuals everywhere, take them as disciples, and then let go of them, leaving this arduous task to those who were responsible. But the fishing operation, involving Komaeda Nagito, his newly recruited young disciple, was different, and Natsume Soseki also had his suspicions about the government. In short, Natsume Soseki felt that he needed to personally oversee everything, with no way to let go. Consequently, he was dragged back by the government again. Even though they didn't pay him, it felt no different from being formally called back from retirement. Once the plan was on track, Natsume Soseki gave himself a long vacation, running off to teach his young disciple and feeling full of guilt. He had properly taught his previous two disciples, but by the time it was Komaeda Nagito's turn, he had become so busy that he felt he had somewhat neglected the young disciple, only being able to think of ways to compensate a bit more. If Mori Ogai knew what Natsume Soseki was thinking, he would have plenty to say. After Komaeda Nagito just got into an accident in the US, the missing for several years Natsume-sensei immediately sent him a letter. If that was called neglect, then Mori didn't know how to spell attention. Natsume-sensei's favoritism could practically tilt the world off its axis. And he was still feeling guilty. Still wanting to compensate. Couldn't he spare a thought for Mori? He wasn't asking for much. not demanding equal treatment to Komaeda Nagito, but at least to be treated similarly to Fukuzawa Yukichi, just to receive a skilled business permit would be enough. However, Natsume Soseki wasn't a worm in Mori Ogai's stomach and couldn't know his thoughts. Besides, even if he did know, Natsume Soseki wouldn't easily agree to his demands. After all, the Port Mafia was still an organization that operated in the shadows. To expect the same treatment as the armed detective agency, Mori Ogai was simply dreaming. He should go get a bucket of ice water and cool down. In short, Natsume Soseki could have indeed enjoyed his retirement life, but because Komaeda Nagito had recently run into the Russian twice, all relevant parties had become tense, including Natsume Soseki. Naturally, he couldn't be as carefree as before. He had to stay in contact to stay on top of the latest intelligence. Right now, the message he was reading was the latest intelligence about the Russian. Under Komaeda Nagito's curious gaze, Natsume Soseki took a deep breath. It can be confirmed, this Russian is indeed Dostoevsky. How is it confirmed? Komaeda Nagito asked curiously. With a memory-related ability user. Natsume Soseki sighed. It's like us chatting now. If you don't completely renovate and change the entire floor, 10 years from now, he could walk into this room and know what happened. We collected some tiles from that building and sent them to the ability user for investigation. There was so much to analyze, so it took from yesterday until now to confirm. Komaeda Nagito suddenly understood, so there's such a powerful ability. It sounds very useful. The ability user Natsume Soseki referred to was actually Sakaguchi Ongo, who had fled from the Port Mafia and returned to the Special Division. However, there was no need to disclose this level of detail to Komaeda Nagito. Natsume Soseki responded casually, his expression looking a bit conflicted. Komaeda Nagito was puzzled. Sensei. Is there something going on? Do you need my help? Natsume Soseki felt a headache coming on every time he heard Komaeda Nagito offer help. No, it's something else. Now that Dostoevsky's identity is confirmed, there is a new issue. Considering that Komaeda Nagito was the biggest contributor to this plan, and given that he had explicitly promised to protect him, but somehow, some segment of information had been leaked, causing the Russians to lock onto Komaeda Nagito. If he continued to keep Komaeda Nagito in the dark, Natsume Soseki felt that he was failing as a teacher. So Natsume Soseki continued, the hospital reports that Dostoevsky sustained a head injury and is now suffering from amnesia. Komaeda Nagito. Natsume Soseki sighed deeply. Don't you find it too much of a coincidence? Being someone of Natsume Soseki's standing, it was impossible for him to personally visit the hospital to see such a dangerous individual of unknown motives. So the photos and intelligence he'd just shown Komaeda Nagito were all provided by others. When Dostoevsky woke up, the first thing someone asked was about his identity, and the answer was amnesia. Frankly speaking, nobody really believed it, but his behavior was undeniably ordinary. The two suspicious points were that he was Russian and that he had a Russian copy of Crime and Punishment in his coat pocket. Because of these suspicions, Sakaguchi Ongo was being pushed to work overtime to see if anything useful could be uncovered, and Natsume Soseki had come to Komaeda Nagito to confirm a few things. Now, they finally had a conclusion, but there was no way to get any information out of Dostoevsky. Such as whether he had accomplices, how many people came to Japan, how many were in Yokohama, what they wanted to do. None of these questions could be answered due to his amnesia. They could only continue to have Sakaguchi Ongo work overtime to see if anything useful could be unearthed. No one dared to consider restoring his memory because Dostoevsky was not only notorious in Japan but also internationally wanted. Revealing too much about this matter could cause significant alarm, so instead of attempting to restore his memory and risking his escape, it seemed safer to leave it be. If he has amnesia? Komaeda Nagito asked, what happens next? Natsume Soseki took the opportunity to sit down and teach Komaeda Nagito. He will soon be handed over to the people from Masalt. Masalt? It's a European ability user prison. This prison itself is considered a national secret, but quite a few people know about it by now. Besides, it's not a secret of Japan, so you should just know about it and not talk about it. Natsume Soseki said, its location is also classified, and nobody has successfully escaped from it so far. It's considered one of the most secure prisons in the world. Given Dostoevsky's wanted status, not even Russia has any objections to sending him to Masalt. Komaeda Nagito nodded thoughtfully. So, does this mean Dostoevsky's case is over? No, he still has accomplices. Natsume Soseki said, we've sketched portraits to see if we can catch them, but if we can't, we'll see if his accomplices attempt a rescue. This information had also been obtained after Sakaguchi Ongo worked all night. Actually, it wasn't too hard to figure this out. To know that this amnesiac person was named Dostoevsky, it wasn't as though he himself stood in a basement speaking to the air, saying, I am Dostoevsky. Rather, his accomplices occasionally addressed him as Do-sama, master, and from this, Sakaguchi Ongo had been able to confirm his identity. Natsume Soseki was about to say something else when he suddenly stopped. Oda-kun, come in. A few seconds later, Komaeda Nagito's bedroom door was opened from the outside. Oda Sakanosuke stood at the door, holding a gun. After glancing at Natsume Soseki, he apologized expressionlessly, sorry, I might have misunderstood. He had heard Komaeda Nagito's voice along with an unfamiliar one, and considering the current sensitive situation, he was worried it might be an enemy. But now that he opened the door and saw Natsume Soseki-sensei, Oda Sakanosuke said, recognizing the man who had once given him a torn book ending, I didn't expect it to be you. Natsume Soseki waved to Oda Sakanosuke, come in and sit. He had already thought about it. If Oda Sakanosuke found out, he wouldn't hide his acquaintance with Komaeda Nagito from him. That was why he felt comfortable visiting Komaeda Nagito's house with Oda Sakanosuke here. Oda Sakanosuke was someone he actually remembered quite well. Years ago, Oda Sakanosuke had gained some fame as an assassin, which had caught Natsume Soseki's attention as he passed by. Feeling intrigued, he ended up chatting with the young assassin and left him a book. Natsume Soseki had a habit of doing such things casually. Whenever he met someone with potential, he would lend a hand if possible. He treated his own disciples with a hands-off approach, and towards those he merely crossed paths with, he was content to nurture them briefly before moving on. Whether or not they flourished afterward wasn't his concern. After all, life is something one must sculpt for oneself, and he was just a passerby. Later, while observing Mori Ogai's disciple, Dazayo Samu, Oda Sakanosuke once again came into his view. Natsume was pleasantly surprised to find that Oda Sakanosuke had indeed given up killing and had even adopted several orphans who had lost their parents during the Dragon's Head conflict. Many so-called good people couldn't stop killing even after everything was over, but Oda Sakanosuke managed to. Natsume Soseki was glad to see Oda Sakanosuke persist in holding onto his principles, raising a family, and striving to right. Now, Oda Sakanosuke had even managed to support his family solely through his writing. Originally, Natsume Soseki hadn't known whether Oda Sakanosuke could write or not. He had only seen that the young man loved reading, and thought perhaps he could give it a try. So he encouraged Oda Sakanosuke to finish the book, and the outcome had turned out even better than Natsume Soseki had imagined. Not only had Oda Sakanosuke stopped killing, he had also taken up writing, won awards, and even provided for his family. It was an ending more perfect than Natsume Soseki had hoped for. But then, Mori Ogai had to show up and ruin the happy ending. Natsume Soseki looked like someone who roamed around in cat form and seemed to live without a care. But in reality, he was very busy, especially recently, to the point that he didn't need to elaborate. In short, when he finally found some free time to check on his unfortunate second disciple, he discovered that Mori Ogai had almost dragged Oda Sakanosuke into hell. Natsume Soseki felt a bit guilty towards Oda Sakanosuke. After all, he often visited Lupin and frequently saw Oda Sakanosuke together with Dazayo Samu, Komaeda Nagito, and Sakaguchi Ongo. Human emotions are fickle, and seeing Oda Sakanosuke's progress in writing firsthand made him more important to Natsume Soseki than others who had simply received his fleeting guidance. Moreover, the person who plotted against Oda Sakanosuke was none other than Mori Ogai, one of his disciples, and the reason Oda Sakanosuke and his children ended up in danger stemmed from something Natsume Soseki had said impulsively. Natsume Soseki felt he should compensate Oda Sakanosuke somehow. His advice back then had been somewhat half-hearted. Most people in danger would choose to kill. It was even easier for a retired assassin to face danger, as the decision not to kill inherently carried risks. Fortunately, Oda Sakanosuke's enemies were all dead, so no one came looking for him. Otherwise, the bomb would have exploded a long time ago. After expressing his concern for Oda Sakanosuke, Natsume Soseki got to the point. If you run into any trouble with your writing, feel free to ask me. Don't worry about leaving the port mafia, you can leave whenever you want. If Mori Ogai comes looking for you, you can mention my name. Not killing is my own decision, it's not your fault, Natsume-sensei. Please don't worry too much, Oda Sakanosuke replied. However, your help is just what I need right now, and I'm very grateful. Under different circumstances, he might have refused, but these two offers of assistance were exactly what Oda Sakanosuke needed. It was just a pity that the stack of resignation letters he had copied hadn't been put to use yet. But knowing that he now had someone to turn to when he faced difficulties in writing, and that it was his favorite author, Oda Sakanosuke felt quite lucky. Pulling a promising seedling out of the port mafia's swamp, Natsume Soseki's mood improved a little. Afterward, he asked Oda Sakanosuke to write a resignation letter on the spot and hand it to him, telling him to wait for further news. Oda Sakanosuke wrote his resignation letter at Komaeda Nagito's desk while Natsume Soseki continued talking to Komaeda Nagito. In any case, this was all thanks to you. The house collapse ended well. Don't worry, no one died. The most seriously injured was him, and this time they directly pinpointed his location, gathering a lot of intelligence. Unfortunately, I can't commend you for this. But if you have any requests, feel free to ask, and this old man will do his best to fulfill them. Just as Natsume Soseki said, the harvest this time was indeed quite substantial. Sakaguchi Ango, working overtime through the night, finally organized all the gathered intelligence, including Dostoevsky's subsequent plans, accomplice names, and government insiders. The only information related to Komaeda Nagito, however, was how Dostoevsky had locked onto Komaeda Nagito in the first place. Master, Yakuran Gesso mentioned Komaeda Nagito. When Sakaguchi Ango heard Komaeda Nagito's name from Dostoevsky's accomplice, it was an indescribable shock. He almost choked on his own saliva. After all, Sakaguchi Ango had no idea about Komaeda Nagito's involvement in anything. Although he knew Komaeda Nagito was Natsume Soseki's disciple, he had always thought Komaeda Nagito was just an ordinary student, learning basic life lessons, nothing more. It wasn't until he was dragged into last night's overtime work that he learned Komaeda Nagito had sought out Mimic for Oda Sakanosuke's sake. Now, having used his ability to uncover the truth, Sakaguchi Ango couldn't help but light a candle for Dostoevsky. The city's gates caught fire, and the fish in the moat suffered. When Komaeda Nagito caused a landslide at Mimic's base, Dostoevsky's underground residence collapsed. What is this mess? With a few months left in the year, it seemed the title for the year's strangest news was practically decided. At least, in Sakaguchi Ango's mind, nothing could surpass this within the year. Finding that Komaeda Nagito was caught up in Dostoevsky's dangerous plans, Sakaguchi Ango pushed himself to the limit, working non-stop to handle the situation. He would even pass out if he closed his eyes for more than 10 seconds. Thanks to Yakuran Gesso's name, Natsume Soseki quickly located the leader of the Millefiori family back in Italy. Unfortunately, the distance made it impossible for him to take revenge for his young disciple, and the motive for targeting Komaeda Nagito remained unknown. He could only silently note it down in his little book, hoping for a chance to strike. Natsume Soseki didn't have to do anything, really. The Millefiori family's intelligence network was highly developed, almost unrecognizable as a newly established group. It was faster than many long-established mafia organizations, so not long after Dostoevsky was transferred to the Masalt prison for ability users in Japan, Yakuran Gesso received the news. Yakuran Gesso's cold sweat ran down instantly, especially when he inquired about how Dostoevsky was captured. He couldn't sit still. Oh, heavens! Dostoevsky, such a formidable figure, who even tricked several Yakurans into their deaths in parallel worlds, was now hospitalized due to a landslide-induced earthquake, even losing his memory. The intelligence also mentioned that there was Mimic in the mountains during the earthquake. And Mimic had recently attacked Komai de Nagito's house. This was practically a giveaway. Komai de Nagito must have been on the mountain during the landslide. If not, he wouldn't eat cotton candy for a year. Right now, Yakuran Gesso felt that the cotton candy in his mouth no longer tasted sweet. Think about it, even when Dostoevsky hadn't taken direct action, he still lost his memory. What would happen to someone like him, who had sold Komai de Nagito out? All he had done was mention Komai de Nagito's name to Dostoevsky, nothing else. Could that be judged more leniently? Yakuran Gesso, deeply shaken, reminisced a little about the movie Final Destination. He decisively made a phone call, booking a spot at a nursing home, wanting a setup similar to the one in Final Destination where the survivor's room had every possible safety measure. The walls and floors would be covered in foam, no electrical appliances could be used, and the best meal would be something he could eat with his hands, no knives or forks allowed. As for the Millefiori family matters, they would be temporarily handed over to Kikyo, until he could check on everything again later. After the phone call, Yakuran Gesso finally shook off that overwhelming sense of fear, eating a piece of cotton candy to calm himself down. Though he had memories of himself from the parallel world, ultimately he was still just a 14-year-old minor. Such unpredictable catastrophes, like the ones in Final Destination, were beyond what caution could prepare him for. With his own problems resolved, Yakuran Gesso found himself in the mood to think about other things, such as a certain doubt that had surfaced at this moment. Where was Dostoevsky's accomplice? Why hadn't they come to save him? It was understandable back in Japan, but not coming to rescue him in Masalt? Without Dostoevsky's own planning, it was a hellish difficulty. However, Yakuran Gesso couldn't ponder this question deeply. Because he choked on his cotton candy. A few coughs didn't manage to dislodge the cotton candy stuck in his windpipe, and in such a moment of panic, even his sky flame couldn't be put to use. While he still had some awareness left, Yakuran Gesso swept everything off the table onto the floor, hoping the noise would alert someone outside, and started performing the Heimlich maneuver on himself. Why did he have to act cool and put on a show like this? With the muffled sound and the soundproofing of his office, would anyone really hear him? Fortunately for Yakuran Gesso, fate wasn't ready to end him just yet. Just as he failed to rescue himself and fell onto the carpet, struggling to figure out his next move, his loyal subordinate Kikyo entered. Moreover, with sharp observation, Kikyo immediately realized that Yakuran Gesso was choking. He swiftly threw aside the documents in his hand and rushed forward, using the Heimlich maneuver to try and save him. Yakuran Gesso felt like his stomach was about to burst from the pressure when that piece of cotton candy finally came out. But due to prolonged lack of oxygen, Yakuran Gesso was left a little lightheaded and physically drained. With some rest, he would be able to recover. However, the ever-loyal Kikyo would not allow any risks. So, just like he had performed the Heimlich maneuver earlier, he decisively began to perform CPR. Suddenly regaining consciousness, Yakuran Gesso's eyes snapped open. He understood. This was not just a physical assault but a mental one as well. He only mentioned a name, this kind of harm was unnecessary. He would not accept. If there's anyone else plotting against Komai de Nagito, even if they do not achieve results on the level of Mimic or Dostoevsky, as long as they end up just as miserable as him, that's enough, otherwise, he wouldn't find peace. Chapter 80 End.